Okay.
Oh, good.
Welcome to Oslo.
Yeah, thank you.
So you're here for the Zero conference.
I am.
Excellent. And, this is our little social democracy, which is, as originally an American guy, obviously people in my homeland many are very afraid of what we have here. And you on the podcast, Cleaning Up, have been talking a lot about all things electric.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's going to be a little bit fun for us as we drive through is to observe just how much is electric.
Yeah, indeed.
I'm going to geek out and show you like a couple little charging things in the way and like see how many different types of vehicles we can find.
That sounds good. So, I mean, this is, here we are in kind of electrostate central. Well, petrostate and electrostate
Very much
central. And I can't tell you how many years I've been showing charts of, Norway, and it's going electric so fast. And so it's always great to come back here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize the petrostate part.
Well, isn't it the petrostate that pays for it all?
I guess it depends on how you think about it. So I got my first electric car in 2014. And what Norway did was Norway had an almost 100% tax on cars. So if you accept that as a starting point, what they did is they removed the tax on cars and they temporarily removed the VAT.
Yeah.
And then they layered on some other things. The tax on cars was derived from factors like emissions, horsepower, or displacement and stuff like that, right? So a G-Wagon in Norway will cost you $300,000-$400,000 maybe, as opposed to what it really costs. One of the things that is a struggle here is figuring out how to drive, because we've also had a lot of government innovation around walking only parts of the city. So you have to bear with me a little bit as we figure out how to get the hell out of here.
So this point about the sort of huge tax on petrol, diesel cars, on fossil cars, and then cutting the tax. And I used to show these charts saying, look at that, Norway, 10% of cars are electric, 20% of cars are electric. And people would say, yeah, but it's kind of bullshit. It doesn't matter because they're taxing the other cars so heavily, so it's irrelevant. Right. It doesn't read across. It doesn't read across. And I was saying, no, it does read across. What it shows is, as soon as these cars become cheaper, it doesn't matter why they become cheaper. It could be taxation, could be the cost coming down. Once they become cheaper, you do go 10%, 20%, 40%, 60%. It does do that. And of course, now that's obvious because we've now seen it happen in other countries, perhaps more because the costs have come down than because they put the costs of other things up.
Right.
And the other thing that was interesting was things like exemptions from ferry charges or from road tolls, a lot of the kind of convenience factors. And I think that's what the shift to clean transportation is partly going to be economic. It's partly going to be, these kind of little, partly going to be these sort of extras that can be thrown in at relatively low cost by government.
Absolutely.
And then the other piece that people don't talk about enough is performance. These are just better vehicles. They just drive better, and they're just more. They're just better.
They're pretty fun.
Yeah, they're pretty
fun. One of the big incentives that made a huge difference here was they gave electric cars for the first several years access to the taxi and bus lanes.
Yeah.
It was huge.
That would be, speaking as a former member of the Board of Transport for London, that would be hugely controversial.
Yeah, so all of those incentives that are layered in and around are going to make a huge difference. And then the other thing, I'd like to try this out on you. The other thing that I've thought about and claimed as I've talked to folks from other places about this is this very small country of Norway probably also had a little bit of an impact on the revolution as a whole with regard to EVs, because it was the first place that Tesla really got a foothold.
No, there's no question that having a kind of bellwether, having one place where we're getting this sort of deep integration of electric transportation really helps, because you could just point to it. It kind of doesn't matter how big or how small that place is. I mean, what you really want to see following Norway would be larger countries getting to the similar levels of penetration, because, then you can see a sort of stepping stones. But to have that first test bed, I can tell you it was incredibly important, because, it basically put people on the back foot. They had to explain why it was not relevant, why you couldn't look at Norway, why it didn't read across. They're already on the back foot.
Exactly. And then, of course, it's been super interesting to then follow My first electric car was a 3-seater, and all of those
Yep.
seats were on the same bench. And it was classified technically as a moped. I doubt we'll see one today. There's still a few of them rolling
Was this
around.
a thing?
The Think was actually a 2-seater.
The Think was a two-seater.
The Think was a 2-seater. Well, and then it had seats in the back too.
I'm showing my Norwegian, electric vehicle history knowledge there. I'm just
You
showing
are.
off. But I met the brilliant founder behind Think back at the time. But, electric cars were kind of like, in the UK, we had electric milk floats, and then Norway
Right.
sort of huge step forward with the Think, but it was ahead of its time.
It definitely was, right? And it was actually called a Kuwait Buddy. And it was classified as a moped. It maxed out at 40. It was rear-wheel drive. And they built them in a little factory that's a few kilometers up the hill here. So, but the thing that I was trying to get to before I went off on that tangent was that it's been interesting to see how other car companies have then reacted, right? You had the sort of weird ones. You had some odd tries by American car companies back in the 80s and 90s, right? Then you had some weird ones. Then you had Elon Musk with his big news and promises, and then he delivered the S and the X and the Y and all that sort of stuff. What are the Germans going to do?
Yeah, I mean, I love the potted history. Elon did have an absolutely huge impact. There's absolutely no question. But, I mean, there's a good sort of academic debate about, well, would we be in the same place anyway? Because, somebody would have figured it out. In fact,
Right.
Elon was not the guy that figured it out. He was an
Exactly.
investor who then sort of, he then backed the horse to the extent that he jumped on it and rode it.
Right.
But the argument could be made that GM realized, because that's why, who killed the electric car? They
Yeah.
realized that actually this, it's like, moly, that little Skunk Works project that we had actually works, which was driven by California and so on. And then I think perhaps the Chinese would have realized anyway.
See
So
what we've got outside the window here.
what have we got here? Oh, Voyar. Who's Voyar?
One of these Chinese car
Right.
manufacturers selling EV.
Yeah. And I mean, I saw today there were Yutong buses.
Absolutely.
I have created HGV charging business, pan-European HGV charging business called Pragma Charge. Right now, there are no 40-ton Chinese trucks homologated for Europe, but it's only a matter of time. Will we buy them? I don't know, but I do know that we will be buying cheaper trucks next year than this year, and it's cheaper this year than last year, and so on. So
And
that
again and
downward
again and
pressure, the Chinese cost pressure is going to be hugely important.
It is a fantastically ugly car,
That
right?
is a car.
And that must be a direct shot at
Sorry, Voyar, your cars are ugly. They may work great, but that is an ugly car.
That is an ugly car, right? So, I mean, as we go here, let's see if we, well, here comes one right now, this taxi coming up beside us here, right? So many compelling, and that one on the other side of the street as well. I mean, so many compelling Chinese options.
And so your question about what are the German car companies going to do? And it's not just German. I mean, it's all the American ones and the other European car manufacturers. I mean, I think it's pretty clear, and I've thought this for, I'm going to say a decade, that they can either lose their existing business to themselves, so they can cannibalize their own business, or they can lose it to Chinese or a Chinese clone type business. Because I mean, China's going to be exporting, building factories in the Bangladesh and Vietnam and Thailand and across Africa and so on. So, but the switch to electric transportation is unstoppable. And there'll be niches that hold out. If you want to tow a boat, right, then the range drops so far. Then okay, I get it. But basically, that switch is unstoppable for the majority of all land transportation.
Exactly, right. And so it's interesting to think about then why that is. I mean, you could argue, as we're seeing in many industries, I mean, even AI, you could argue is partly a dematerialization play, right? It's dematerialization, it's miniaturization, it's simplification, right? The number of moving parts, et cetera, in one of these vehicles compared to, but then that also then means, complexity is a way to earn money. And when complexity disappears from a lot of these types of things, cars being a great example.
Well, I think required complexity. If you actually look at it, look at the engine of a Ferrari. There's a Porsche over there. I mean, it is a thing of great beauty. I'm a mechanical engineer, so don't get me wrong. I think that the ingenuity, and what's really interesting when you look at something like that, you open the hood, pop the hood, what you'll see is an accretion of knowledge of whatever that is, what are we going to say, 130 years, 140
Yeah,
years of knowledge.
absolutely.
In fact, even more, because the metallurgy that was used even back in the sort of the first internal combustion vehicles,
Mhm.
you couldn't just kind of, stroll through a, forest and gather some rocks and make that. I mean, this was already hundreds and hundreds of years of knowledge there. And you see this thing kind of coming to the peak of perfection in your Ferrari engine or your Porsche engine or whatever. And then there's just a jump to a different learning curve and a different
Yeah.
technology platform, which outperforms. I saw a YouTube video a few weeks ago, and it was a bunch of supercars against, I think it was a Hyundai Ioniq something, whatever.
Okay, a normal car.
It looked like a family car. And it was
Yeah.
obviously the one with the 4-wheel, hub-mounted motors, and
Okay,
it was
sure.
the top end. But it was fundamentally it was $100,000 vehicle.
Yeah.
And it was up against ultimately they put I think it was the Bugatti Veyron or whatever.
Right. Yep.
But they started with the Jaguar, the Porsche, the whatever, and it was and they did a drag race, and it was a race for second place. There were these, $500,000, $200,000 to $1 million cars just being yomped by this sort of family hatchback, sort of
Exactly.
mini SUV thing, and it was, it's poignant, right? Because these are beauties of engineering, but they're just being utterly outclassed.
Yeah.
Utterly outclassed.
Exactly.
And that's where we live. That's where we live. So you can either try and fight that. And I was in Japan a couple of years ago trying to explain to them that fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cell cars were not going to be a thing. And they said, but you don't understand, Mr. Liebreich, how many jobs in Japan depend on the car industry and on the motor industry. And I was trying to explain, well, you can either lose those jobs to China or you can lose those jobs to, and there'll be fewer because it's solid state stuff. It's less complex. You can lose it to yourselves. But that is the choice you face. You don't face a choice of, in 30, 40, 50 years, people using these complex systems and complex gas management and complex ways of managing, thermal, having to get rid of all this excess heat that gets produced for no reason and so on.
Exactly.
We're just not going to be in that world. So you have to kind of live in the real world.
I would like to come back to, so let's make a mental note on this real, but also intellectual and emotional sunk cost point that you're making. I'm also a bit of a car nut, and, my father's a car club enthusiast in the US.
Sorry, just to interrupt. By the way, that's a really interesting one. That's the MG that we're following right now. Because
Also Chinese.
car nut, you talk about car nuts. I mean, MG is a storied brand. I mean, there are people in the MG club, huge membership and so on. They're actually navigating that transition as a brand, and it is Chinese now, but as a brand, they're actually kind of navigating it quite adeptly, I think.
Absolutely, right? Exactly. The other thing that I think is interesting about this sports car question, right? Sports cars are cool. I mean, I have twin sons, and one of them is very into cars, and he eggs me on all the time about, Dad, now it's time to try to get a hold of a mid-90s 911 or something like that. And, the sound, and it takes a little bit of skill to make that whole machine work exactly the way that you want to, right? So I've had a couple Model S's. I had a Model Y, which bored the shit out of me, because it's an excellent car. But there was nothing special about it. It was an amazing family car. And then I was curious, are the Germans able to make a sports car that's fun, that's electric? The last part being important. And if this was 6 weeks ago, we'd have been driving that. So I bought an Audi e-tron GT, basically the Porsche version, one of those, but the Audi one, which I think the Audi one's a little bit more understated and much more beautiful. And that was an absolutely fantastic car to drive. Just glued to the road, fast as hell, really fun, stylish, but the skill point isn't really there, right? So the challenge.
So this is the Audi. It's an electric.
It's an electric Audi,
right?
Four-door,
yeah,
super low, super wide. We'll see one here in a little bit. I'm sure I'll point it out. Right. And there was something about that driving experience that was this is a fantastic car, but there's something about the magic that's missing.
Yeah, there is. But, look, I hate to say it, but, there are people who still, rave about the magic of steam engines.
True.
And again, there was this huge skill base that was built up, and they required a combination of science and skill and art and, what the Germans would call Gefühl, the
Mhm.
fingertip feeling,
Yeah.
to get the most out of them. And um, I don't deny, I don't deny, look, I say I'm a mechanical engineer, and I'm also, I
Mm.
love the history of industries. I'm
Mm.
fascinated by technologies shape industries and also shape society, and they shape the physical geography around. I mean, I don't know this, what that building in front of us was originally, but I'm pretty sure
It was a brewery.
it was a brewery. So
Yeah.
why did we have breweries that looked like that were located where they were? Well, there was
Yeah.
because there was water available and there was
Yep.
energy and all the rest of it. So fascinated by that. But that just doesn't stack up against somebody who is just choosing a car to take their kids to school or to go to their job, their job at a hospital, or and then they think, well, I do that most of the time, but then I want to go on holiday,
Mm.
so I need a vehicle that does both. And people make these very practical decisions most of the time, and a few people can afford to say, I want a car that makes that Ferrari engine noise or the Audi engine noise. And there are some people who will do that,
Mhm.
but that group will shrink down to a bunch of car club enthusiasts. That's the reality of it.
Exactly, and even I eventually had to make a move to something a little bit more practical.
Yeah.
To account for my my very typical Norwegian living situation that you're going to see here in a bit when we go into the forest. It's not typical at all.
But look at it. I mean, think about it. The way that's part of life. We used to have real skill in, I don't know, darning socks was a very skillful thing, and
Yeah.
but you had to be able to master it. And before radio, people made their own music, and so there's constantly a sort of frontier of the clever stuff that you have to master.
Mhm.
Right now, I'm playing with vibe coding because I just think that that's going to be an important skill, and then eventually it'll go away because you just won't even need to vibe code. You'll just magic stuff out of the air with one thought or whatever. But there is this frontier, but I think it's part of the sort of human condition that what is kind of cool and interesting and gives you competitive advantage just gets commoditized to hell in some way. Yeah, it's always moving.
And then, so this question gets bigger pretty quick. Resources are important, but there's many different types of resources. There's metals, and there's energy, but there's also human attention, right? There's lots of ways to think about this. So the fact that
Electric digger.
there we go.
In real life. I mean, I'm going to tell you, that's the first I've seen out in the streets of a city, an actual electric digger. I love it.
And a second one right next to it. Right?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's electric, that
It's
one.
got the cord on the side of it.
Is it electric? Listen to it. It's making proper noises, not quite like a Ferrari. No. It's just the jackhammer that's making the noise. That is unbelievable.
Right.
And of course, what amazes me is, back in the UK, we still have people running around going, it's all going to go to hydrogen because you couldn't do that with electricity. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to tell them, go to Oslo if you want to see a snapshot from the future.
Think about how much energy it takes to do that impact, but it only runs however many hours a day it runs. It has a big battery probably, right? So another electric one here. So the construction companies in Norway, I think probably the guys that operate these things and gals are probably happy because of the smells and the pollution and stuff like that, right? So I'm just driving around here. I think we're looking at a construction site here.
And the residents. What would be fascinating to know, so this is Z-Rent, it looks like. So kudos to Z-Rent, because presumably they have a big charger somewhere, or
right,
that they can go and charge them overnight.
Well, what I've also observed, though, is that there's mobile chargers being put in for those things on the jobs.
Yeah. So with PragmaCharge, the HGV charging business that we're rolling out with first location in Spain and so on, I'm pretty sure that we will end up being used as a location for either battery swapping or battery charging. Probably, I suspect the way that this will work will be somewhere parked in a side street. There'll be a container full of batteries, or wherever these things go at night. I guess they just get parked up, but it's not that hard to bring a container.
I wonder if I just saw it over there, because what I've seen them doing is I've seen them putting what almost looks like a fast charger, a consumer fast charger, on a pallet.
Yeah, exactly.
Drop it on the street, connect it to the mains.
Exactly. And then you swap that out with a battery that you can bring, so you'll be able to charge it at our location, maybe during the day when our trucks are out. You'll still use the grid connection, charge a container full of batteries or a battery on a pallet, whatever you need, and then take it off to the construction site. And what is amazing is, and this is also a generalizable thought about this transition, is that if you look at the way we do things now, if you want to sort of trash talk the transition. You say, oh, well, you couldn't possibly do that. What happens if you have a construction site that needs to work 24/7? Right? First of all, a lot of these things are edge cases, mostly what you don't. I mean, I don't know, noise restrictions. I'll bet you they're not jackhammering past whatever time of
7
evening.
to 3, I bet they were.
7 to 3, or in some places you could work until 10 at night.
Sure.
But you're going to have those breaks. So, if you start arguing, if you have to argue an edge case in order to say something won't happen, something is sort of obviously good and beneficial and going to work, and then you have to come up with some bizarre edge case, you're probably on the losing side of the argument. And then the other thing is, even the edge cases, if you said, well, that's the only time when you need an X, some, old-fashioned whatever, but, legacy solution, that legacy solution is going to get so expensive, because then you start saying, well, hang on a second, because all the gas stations will have closed by then, or holy moly, at that point, we're only making diesel for, the army and heavy construction.
Exactly.
So isn't that going to be really expensive per unit, and so on? So you if you want to do real systems thinking, you have to do more than just find an edge case and then postulate that that's a showstopper, or keep sort of everything the same except the one thing that you accept is going to change. Because actually these things are highly dynamic. They are systems, and you've got to think it all the way through.
Propagate, right?
Yeah.
The people that are operating these job sites are then going to be thinking like, well, I mean, as an example, one of the other things that's happening in this, so that's actually a gasoline bus. You don't see, or a diesel bus. Both of these were, interestingly. Most of them are not. But the people that operate these things will be then thinking, we only have 1 or 2 vehicles left.
Yes.
Need to have the diesel truck go around, or a diesel tank sited on site. And nobody really wants the diesel tank sited in front of their apartment building, and blah, 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 blah. So then let's just do the rest.
The sector is full of these kind of non-linear effects where, once you get to some kind of a tipping point, then the other stuff gets more expensive. And, we've seen it on the electricity system. This is one of the reasons why we've got high power prices, is because suddenly you've got enough renewables for the other stuff not to run enough hours.
Exactly.
And therefore it starts to get expensive. So we're betwixt and between two systems, either of which would be affordable and high performing, one of which, of course, would be polluting and emitting. But we've kind of got a mixed system, which has got these big transient costs in the middle.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think I've been arguing, in 2014, I was asked by Equinor and a company that I worked in to come in and help their senior executives learn about climate change and renewable energy technology. And if you'd asked me a year before that, I'd told you that energy wasn't a particularly interesting topic. I was invited to do that because I'm a facilitator and I help people learn things, right? So we traveled the world and looked at things, but part of it was happening outside our window. This part of it was in its germinating stage, right? We've got an electric 4-door Porsche, which is the Porsche version of that Audi I was talking about in front of us. And traveling around the world and talking to, is it Jeremy Rifkin? The hydrogen economy?
Yeah.
Right? We talked to Jeremy.
Yeah.
All of these things, and then trying to think like, which of these things is going to gain traction? Where is it potentially going to go? And then also this other dynamic that you touched on a little bit before, that is an industry, the automotive industry is an industry that is very much motivated by the parts of the answer that they sort of need to be true because of all kinds of different sunk costs. And how do you think about it without getting captured by those? Because they're real.
So there's a lot there. So energy being boring, I mean, I couldn't disagree more.
I've learned better since.
By the way, what did you study? What were you before then, before you became this sort of energy evangelist?
Well, I mean, I started out, I went to a military university in the US and then was a logistics officer in the Army in Korea and the West Coast for a while. And then I worked in IT for a little bit. And then I uprooted myself, came to Norway and started to learn how to facilitate processes, basically.
Interesting route. See, I studied energy at university. I mean, physics, you could say energy, back at high school. And although, it being Cambridge, what you do is a Bachelor of Arts in engineering, right? And then a few years later, they send you the Master of Arts. Kind of, you pay, I don't know, it was like one sovereign or 4 crowns or something ridiculous,
Right.
and they send you the Master of Arts. If somebody says they've got a Master of Arts from Oxford or Cambridge, what they've actually got is a Bachelor of Arts plus this
Right.
sort of, cornflake packet thing that they send you. If you want to have a Master's from Oxford and Cambridge, it needs to be an MSc or an MPhil or something.
Yep.
Those are serious. So I did a Bachelor of Arts in engineering, but really it was energy engineering, because what I actually did was thermodynamics, fluids, mechanics, and So I think this stuff is the most fascinating thing ever. Thermodynamics is why we exist. Thermodynamics is the only thing that explains how we can self-organize into this anything. Life, complex molecules, houses, cars, all of that is actually explained by the flows of energy and how order can emerge out of chaos. Despite the fact that you have this kind of push towards higher entropy, we still manage to self-organize rather attractively and have, and create all of this. So that's all thermodynamics. I think this is the most fascinating thing ever. But also when you go to energy systems as we know them, so electricity and fuels and so on, it is ferociously complex. It is a system of systems of systems of systems, including the finance system, the digital system. There's everything from payments through to also anthropology and how people make decisions and how they live with each other and the whole kind of tribalism of it and so on. So it is. And that gives it, I think that means that these decisions, there's lots of space because it's so complicated. There's lots of space for people to believe what they want to believe.
Yeah.
Because there are so many edge cases and there's so many, but you didn't think of this and but you didn't know, what about this connection? That you can actually cherry pick to the point where you can disagree with things that, at least to you and me, might be bleeding obvious.
Yeah.
But you can sort of construct a narrative. And this is the brilliance of Bjorn Lomborg or some of the people who don't want to believe or who make their living not believing. It is possible to construct a sort of tissue of facts. And they are facts. They're not factoids. They're facts. But it is a tissue in that it's not past, the sort of Occam's razor test of being, you have this thing going on and there's a really simple explanation, which is the product is better.
Yeah.
But then you can come up with a tissue of pseudo explanations which suggest that it's not generalizable or whatever. All of your facts are correct, but you're just wrong.
Exactly.
And that's the beauty of the debate. That's why the debate is so rich and so complicated.
And you layer social media on top of that.
Yeah.
And then you're off to the races. But importantly, you're off to the races in both a fortunate and an unfortunate matter at a time in history where it's becoming more important that we're a little bit sorted and a little bit coordinated.
Yes, so you can paint the picture of a sort of easy transition that's inevitable using facts, and you can paint a picture of a transition that is completely impossible and not happening using facts. And the problem with social media is that it enables you to live a perfectly, sort of wealthy, happy, productive life, never interacting and never really being mashed up and having to confront the contradictions, the fact that there are these other facts that you haven't refuted, you've simply excluded them from your analysis.
Exactly.
And so you can have very rich conversations that actually are they're kind of marginal to the real conversation, to the reality. And that's very dangerous because we kind of need to sort this stuff out relatively quickly.
There's lots of things that I'd love to show you that are going on in Oslo regarding or related to this whole electrification or electric tech revolution. One of them is that just over the past 6 months, really, about 50% of the gas pumps in every gas station are being ripped out and are being replaced by 300 or 400 kilowatt hour chargers or kilowatt chargers, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. That typically gas stations around here have 6 pumps. And then the ones that have a little bit more real estate around the gas station, they're starting to just like carpet like the backside. And so maybe you'll have 3 gas pumps and then you'll have 9 chargers, which is a pretty fascinating development. And it's something that we saw none of 12 months ago.
Interesting.
And suddenly it's happening to a lot of them.
Yeah. And it doesn't surprise me. It's an interesting development. And as I say, again, this will be somewhere where we will be able to learn from Norway's experience of at what point do we start dismantling the old? And it'll be different country by country, but we're still at the point in the UK where we need to we have an electric car and we charge it from the lampposts quite a bit.
Right.
But I'll be honest, it is not a reliable system.
On the street.
So we don't have off-street parking, and the lampposts are, they're just ferociously convenient, right? Because you park up and you've got lampposts,
Sure.
lampposts everywhere, but it's not yet ubiquitous. So we're still at that kind of point. The challenge of getting rapid chargers into petrol stations is going to be the grid will need consistent investment over a decade or so to get there, to be able to actually serve that. But I've never had any doubt that we will go there. So the analogy that I've used a lot is when I first showed my sister the internet. The web didn't really exist. It was back in the 1990s. She said she will never use email because when I tried to show it to her, we got a busy signal.
Right.
And so that was it for her. And of course, roll on a few years, you get a lot more modems. And then we don't know what's a modem. We don't even know anymore.
No, nobody knows.
But we had the same thing around video on demand. Huge debates, and I was very involved in them in around the year sort of 2000, 2001 too. Will we ever have video on demand? And the answer is, of course we will. It's just a question of consistent investment that will solve all the problems, all the concerns, and we'll have ubiquitous charging everywhere. I've got no doubt.
So I don't have on-the-street charging either, as you'll see in a bit. So this is where I charge. These are Circle K, Canadian company that bought Equinor's gas station business a number of years ago. 300 kilowatts. 300
kilowatts. I mean, so you're there for, 20 minutes, you get a couple of 100 kilometers?
Well, the reason I park there is because I buy groceries here.
Right.
And so then I race the charger.
There are, of course, those edge cases where you say, but what happens if we've got a Flix bus that's trying to do London to Seville with two drivers? Well, okay, fine. With two drivers, you know, but even then, you know what? People still have to get on and off the bus and walk around and buy a coffee and all those sorts of things. The truck business, we are using 375 kilowatt chargers. It would be nice to have a little bit more than that, let's say half a megawatt, because what you're looking at in Europe is that the truck driver, after 4.5 hours, has to stop for 45 minutes.
Exactly.
And at that point, if you can fill, so in 4.5 hours, they can do, broadly speaking, 400 kilometers. So if you could charge 400 kilometers in 45 minutes, then you are basically set. And that turns out to be about a half a megawatt. So do you need megawatt chargers? Not in Europe. It's just, you just don't.
Exactly.
Now, for private cars, it's a bit different because you could be in a situation, unlike with a truck, where you could say, you know, oh my goodness, I've just had a call and my daughter's locked out of the house and I need to get there and holy moly, I've got an empty battery.
Exactly.
Okay, whereas with a petrol car, you'd just be like, you know, honey, it's going to take me 10 minutes more. I've got to get some gas. With an electric, it would be kind of nice to be able to do a similar thing, but you can't if you have to trickle charge. So there are, but again, edge cases. If you have a daughter who's going to lock herself out, don't use up the last, quarter of your battery.
And you learn that stuff over time, and you develop a natural anxiety for having, there's one of those 50%, should have pointed out early, for running your battery too low because you need contingency.
Call it anxiety or just call it the same thing as you do with your phone. If I know I'm going to have a long day, so just before you pick me up from the hotel, I just plugged in and I've got this incredibly fast Anchor charger that in 10 minutes took me from, 60% to 85, 90%. So I'm good. I'm good for the evening. It's just being sensible and just planning a little bit.
Last two comments of just like observations on how this is rolling out here, given how much time Norway's been on this journey. Stands around town now. More and more of them have multiple 150 kilowatt chargers.
Yep.
Outside train stations and stuff. So they stand there, wait for customers and plug in.
Listen, I'm just envious that you have taxi stands. We do have some in London, but mainly we seem to have this system where taxi drivers are expected to just sort of drive around, which is insane from a climate perspective, safety perspective, congestion perspective, and so on. But yeah, taxi stands, electric chargers, and of course, in a situation like that, that's where contactless charging might make sense.
That'd be way
where
easier.
You just say, instead of having the driver having to jump out and plug something in, and what happens when you need to move up the taxi to the front place on the stand and so on.
Yep.
If that was all just built into the road at that point, that would be,
that'd be amazing.
And you'd put up with a little bit less efficiency. You lose 10% of efficiency or something, but it would be, it'd be fine.
Exactly. Okay, so we had basically a 3-part adventure planned for you today. Okay, the first one was to geek out a lot on EV or electric transportation, right? Which we've now talked about having come quite far here with regard to cars, but we also stumbled across a construction site, and I think we're going to stumble across one more on the way here. One of the things that we've not seen as much of, which I hoped we would, is fairly large soil gravel trucks. Lots of those running electric here now too. And obviously most of the city buses are as well. So first part of the journey was to geek out on that a bit. Any closing comments on that section?
Yeah, no, it's really great to see, as you say, Norway's journey, it continues. And what we're talking about is kind of bleeding edge stuff where it starts to really get into the municipal vehicles, etc. That's really interesting. What we've not been doing, and we maybe missed a trick, is looking at these, looking at the heating solutions as well, to see, because you've also got a whole hell of a lot of heat pumps, which,
a raft of them,
according to the laws of physics, don't work in the UK. Read the Telegraph or the Daily Mail, you'll find that they don't work because of the different laws of physics. But of course, in cold countries where we're told they don't work, they of course do. And then we're told, of course, that they're, pardon me, incredibly ugly because they take up all the space and so on. I'm actually trying to find one because these houses and buildings have all got them and I can't see any.
Do you have the heat pump penetration number for Norway in your head, roughly?
I'm going to say 60% or something like that.
It's significant. I would have put it higher, but okay, if we say 60 just to be safe, they're everywhere around us. Norway has also had relatively cheap electricity until the past few years, which means a lot of, you have a more technical term for it, electric baseboard heaters.
Just resistance heating.
Heating.
Around the house.
So there's been a lot of that, but there's been a bit of an electrical price shock here over the past few years. But that leads to a whole other diversion. Have you been into Norgespris at all? Have you heard about this?
Well, so I know that there's a huge ongoing controversy about the electricity being sold to principally Germany and that it's driving up the costs here. I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
Well, so that was the starting point was more connections to other European countries, primarily Germany. And the government addressed that before an election by basically setting what's essentially a subsidy. That means that regardless of what happens to the spot price, Norwegian consumers, if they sign up for it, it's voluntary, will never pay over a certain point. And that also applies to vacation homes, mountains in the cabins and on the seaside. We're really only talking about in the mountains because these are winter places. So then you could argue that that's a huge, because the local solar industry was starting to make a little bit of progress. I don't know that it will affect heat pumps so much, but erasing the motivation to make things more efficient.
So you mentioned solar in that context. It was kind of all sounding very kind of like a nice, coherent picture until that point, because of course the problem with linking solar with a heat pump in Norway is that it wouldn't deliver anything during the winter.
Nothing between November and March.
Right. Yes. Notes to solar industry. If the sun disappears for 6 months of the year, don't try and have your solar drive the heating system.
Nobody was trying to do that.
No, I know. I was just picked you up on that. Well, because otherwise the audience will. No, but it's very interesting. And also you talk about it also applies to mountain cabins. And I noticed that we're getting pretty close to Holmenkollen.
We are.
Which I've visited, and I've actually done cross-country skiing. I've never jumped off it, but I have. I have done cross-country skiing around it. The challenge with that pricing conversation is that what you've got is commodity pricing butting heads with infrastructure investment and infrastructure investment by individuals, because people have made certain decisions about how they heat their homes, and then they're being exposed to commodity prices behaving in a very different way than envisaged. And it is not remotely surprising that creates political friction, because they've been encouraged to heat in certain ways. The markets have encouraged them. Governments have, not told them not to. And then suddenly you're exposed to, I think it's the $4 a shower. The price suddenly goes up, and that's what you're paying.
And some of these customers will remember being encouraged to use these baseboard heaters because we were trying to depollute a little bit because everybody was burning wood.
Yes, it's interesting. We talked about the fact that there are all these heat pumps. There are also chimneys because, the purists will say, the only reason you can have heat pumps in Finland, Norway, and Sweden is because if it gets really cold, they'll throw a few logs on the log burner, which is bad for air quality, but it takes the peak out of the system, because otherwise you've got, when the temperature drops, suddenly your coefficient of performance, which was 3.5 or 4, suddenly it drops to 2. You're system could be really struggling.
Exactly.
So
right.
the old log burners are very helpful. I have to be honest on that one. I'm not a purist. I'm prepared to put up with a little hit to the air quality if it involves billions and billions and tens of billions of dollars of investment or the equivalent in the system. But that is an unpopular position with purists.
Right.
I think that the challenge with the Norway price, this intervention, this subsidy, the worry is that it then masks the price signal.
400 amps, 250 amps. So I think here we're at a spot where there's been some charging.
That looks like an
Construction
upgrade,
vehicles.
probably for electric, driven by the need for more power.
Because there's been a huge project going on here, and there's some electric diggers that are up here, and they've had. There's one that sits here in the street. Sorry to distract at night, and you can see a blue light on it as it charges. So I think they've just built temporary infrastructure. Yeah,
so I was saying about the problem with having the subsidy, the price support, and we did it in the UK during the worst moments after this barbaric invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and the prices went so high that consumers were protected. The problem with doing it as a longer term solution is that it masks the price signal, so that is the problem all day, every day, or is it at a particular time of day?
Right.
Is it a particular time of year? You kind of want people to be, you want those long-term infrastructure decisions to reflect the reality of what's driving the costs. And if you then need to protect people, it would be it would produce better outcomes if you kind of let people have the $4 shower, but at the end of the year said, well, you've probably had 100 showers, so we'll give you $400. Because then, and by the way, we'll pay you that whether you took the showers at $4 or whether you put in a battery or whether you stored hot water or whether you changed your behavior to go to the sports club at a different time. Whatever it is, you kind of want the people to respond to the price signal and then have the protection separated, because you want that rational infrastructure decision. You want rational infrastructure decisions to govern the sort of 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 year build out of what you're going to build out. And so as soon as you mask it, like you say, people they'll stop putting solar on the roof, or they'll stop putting in bigger water storage, hot water storage or whatever, which is what you really want them to do.
That's interesting, because then you quiet down the political discourse, which can be really damaging to progress, but at the same time continue to incentivize behaviors that we'd like to see more of and provide people some relief.
Absolutely. That's right. So you can damp down the political discourse, but you want to do it without removing the pricing. We've had the same in the UK. It's absolutely clear that we have one price zone for the whole of the UK, and you've got a lot of cheap renewables in the north, and you've got a lot of demand in the south. And it's pretty clear that rationally you should separate those two. But then you have people jumping up and down and say, postcode lottery. Yes, there we go. There's the Holman column. Yeah.
Right.
The ski jump, the big ski jump.
Making snow over there.
I love to see that, even though I don't want to go off it at this point with my knees the way they are. So we got this postcode lottery discussion. Of course, there is already a postcode lottery, in the sense that you've got the electricity, the price we pay is not just the price to generate electricity, it's also transmission and distribution, and then a whole bunch of other costs. The distribution costs are already a postcode lottery in the UK, because London is very dense, so you have very cheap distribution, and Scotland is very diffuse, not population-wise, so you have expensive distribution. And you've got a postcode lottery, which, by the way, is very much to the disadvantage of the poorer areas or the less well-off areas. So London gets the cheapest distribution, but then the politics get really messy. I wouldn't say my concern, but what I've observed, the shame is that the messy politics drives then poor economic decision-making. We've just seen that in the UK. And I think also with that, Norway price, probably here a little bit. But you know what? There's also part of me that says, get over it. That's life. I'm not a politician. I don't have to be re-elected.
Sure.
So there is some messiness here. And the more important thing is, what is the direction of travel? Are we broadly getting it right? Or are we broadly not getting it right? I think certainly here, looking around the electrification, you're broadly getting it right.
And hopefully that story can be promising to others and say, okay, it's appearing to work in some way. Now the incentives and subsidies are disappearing, and the number of these cars that continue to be sold because they're better it just continues, right? And there we
Yeah,
are.
people ask me, so which country has got it right? And the answer is nobody.
Yeah,
But we
exactly.
can all learn from each other, that's
Yeah.
for sure, yeah.